Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Pfeiffer. This is Conversations on Retail. It's a beautiful day in Bentonville, Arkansas. I've had some hot summer weather, teased us a little bit with fall, but we're super glad to be with you here today. Our friend Jorge Risquez, co-founder and CEO of Bops, continues his series focused on CPFR 2.0, the technology is bringing us closer to consumers. And Jorge is welcoming his guest, Mike Doherty from Demand Clarity, and Darryl Landvater from Oliver Wight of the Americas. Just a couple things before we get started. First of all, Bops is the sponsor of this series. We're super glad to have them involved, getting to know them and their teams. And I know Jorge will spend a couple of minutes sort of talking about what it is that they do before the end of this conversation. And one thing I want to just reiterate, this is intended to be a conversation and not a presentation. So we hope that you will join that conversation by clicking on the Q&A button at any point during this session and asking your questions, providing comments, or even offering insight, and Jorge will be moderating those as they come in. So again, click the Q&A button there in Zoom and you'll be able to submit your questions and comments in writing. Lastly, the opinions or recommendations expressed by Jorge and his guests are theirs and not necessarily those of Conversations on Retail. So before acting on the opinions and recommendations offered by the experts, always consider the suitability for your circumstances. So again, we're so glad you're here. Jorge, let's get started.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's a pleasure to be hosting CPFR 2.0. This is going to be our second episode. Today, we're going to talk about redefining the F for CPFR. And I'm very blessed to be hosting Darryl and Mike Doherty as kind of the founding fathers of flowcasting. This has been a concept that has revolutionized the retail supply chain. And for many of us, like me, have revolutionized how we do supply chain planning, not only in the retail supply chain planning, but also in the modern supply chain. So without further ado, and I know we're going to talk more about what flowcasting is, which is kind of, I'll start with a sentence, which is synchronizing consumer demand with inventory flow. And I'm going to let Mike and Darryl talk a little bit more about that concept in a second. But I think it's very important for you, Mike, to start with an introduction. And I want to take you back, I'll say 10 to 20 years from now, Mike, when you were at the Canadian Tire at a project and you first met Darryl. So tell us a little bit about you and how you get to meet Darryl as well in the Canadian Tire project.
Yeah, so I'm Mike Doherty, partner with Demand Clarity. We're a boutique consulting firm that works with retailers and their trading partners to help them increase sales and profits by improving in-stocks and inventory performance using the principles of flowcasting. Co-author of the book, Flowcasting the Retail Supply Chain, with Andre Martin, who's actually one of the godfathers of integrated planning and basically the inventor of flowcasting. And Jeff Herrick, who's my business partner at Demand Clarity, consultant and worked with a lot of companies over the years. I've lost 25 years, Canadian Tire, Home Depot Canada, Walmart Mexico, West Marine, Loblaws, Sigma Elementos, our friends in Mexico, Princess Auto, and Bunnings. I got to know Darryl, and we've been collaborators for close to 30 years. It's been the best 30 years of my life. Well, maybe not. But about 30 years ago, close to 30 years ago, mid-1990s, I was leading a team at Canadian Tire, which is a large retailer in Canada, hard goods retailer. And our project's mandate was to design a new way to sort of plan the flow of inventory to the store shelf. And by hook or by crook, we ended up designing what we now call flowcasting. And the executive team was like, what? You're going to only forecast at the store level, a consumer demand forecast along, and you're going to calculate everything else and share that with everybody in terms of, and translate that forecast into those projections. And suppliers are going to ship to that plan to that projection and then ship to that and only order product at the lead time. Are you nuts? And then, so they were like, less than impressed. And they were like, this is never going to work. So I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? So luckily, because I'm a bit stubborn like that at times, luckily, one of the guys on the team goes, well, you should talk to Andre Martin because he's sort of one of the godfathers of integrated planning. So I didn't know the guy, right? Okay, fine. And so I called him up and said, listen, here's what we're trying to do. And he says, I think you're on the right track. We've already been doing that. Let me and my partner, Darryl, come and see you. So they came and saw us. They had already done work on that, already done some prototypes, and they helped us convince the executive team this was the way to go. And Darryl helped on the original implementation, particularly around helping educate the company. Remember, this is the mid-90s, and integrate with our concept called supplier scheduling. So Darryl and I have been sort of, I guess, what you call brothers in arms since that time, basically on this flowcasting journey. So that's a bit about me, and I've teed you up beautiful, Darryl.
There's a bio on me on the Oliver Wight Americas website if you want to read up on it. But for the conversations that have to do with flowcasting, maybe the important things are that I've been involved in a lot of the first implementations. You know, the first implementation of DRP with Andre Martin at Abbott Labs, Canada. The first implementation of using these planning systems for rebuilding, and the first implementation in textiles, the first implementation in shipbuilding would have been the Seawolf nuclear submarine, and the first implementations in retail. And retail is a little bit of a special case in the sense that it's a little bit more challenging than the other types of new introductions that we've done in the past, because the SKU count is just so enormous. And so what we have done is we've said there's a new way to do things. It works. It's proven. It's tested, and that's kind of what we're here today to talk about.
Well, it's more than a pleasure to have you here, Darryl and Mike, and thanks for sharing the story of how you two met back in the days, and you guys have been some of the founding fathers along with Andrew Martin and Flowcasting. So, talking about Flowcasting, and I think we could start with you, Darryl. Can we define in very simple terms what is flowcasting and why is this so important, not only for retailers but also for consumer brands or suppliers of the retailers?
Sure. So if you think about, well, first of all, it's an integrated planning system and it crosses the boundaries of the organization. So it integrates retailers with manufacturers, with raw material suppliers, and so forth. Now, if you think about what we've done over the years in the manufacturing world, if you're making cars and you know I'm going to make 100 cars, you need 400 tires. It's not all that mysterious, right? If you already have a lot of tires, then you probably won't need tires for a while. But if you're pretty low on tires, you may need them pretty much right away. That's a concept called dependent demand, and it comes from a man named Joe Orlicki, who was quite a character. He came over the Czechoslovakian border, World War II, ended up working at IBM, and he coined this concept of dependent demand. And he said, never forecast what you can calculate. So if I'm sitting at a distribution center in a retailer and I want to know what the stores are going to need from me, if a given store has a lot of inventory, it probably is not going to need anything for a while. And I can calculate out, when they're likely to hit their safety stock and need to be replenished. And if a store is pretty low, I can do the same thing. So all you're really taking here is the concept that we had been doing for 40 years or more in manufacturing and turning around and applying it to a different type of business, a retailer working with a manufacturer, for example. But the idea is the same. We have essentially a model of the business. We now know what the planned shipments are in the future, and of course they get recalculated every day, but it gives you a pretty good plan. And you can turn that into dollars. You can turn it into projected inventory levels. You can turn it into a weight cube for transportation. You can turn it into space storage, because you have a projected on-hand balance of every item at every location. So how much storage space is it going to need? And even if you have specialized storage, like you may have frozen storage, or you might have refrigerated storage, you might have storage for things that are flammable or explosive, all that sort of thing. So you basically have a model of the business. And if you say, well, okay, that's pretty well proven and tested. So what's the big deal? And the answer is that, the largest manufacturing company that I worked with in terms of number of items is 4 million. Okay, so 4 million parts go into an item. It's the Seawolf nuclear submarine. Even a small retailer, it's got a couple of million SKUs by the time you take into account all the items at all the locations. And so now we're planning at the top level, forecasting based on demographics and things like that for millions of SKUs, or in some cases, hundreds of millions of SKUs. For example, a Walmart database is roughly 450 million SKUs. So now, if you were to take, and Mike will talk more about this later on, but if you were to take the DRP systems like what we pioneered in Abbott Canada and became very well established over the next, I don't know, 20, 30 years or so, and you were to try to use that for store level, it wasn't designed for it and caused a lot of problems. But if you have something that's appropriately designed for it, it seems to work pretty well. So the easiest way to understand what flowcasting is all about is it's a completely integrated supply chain. It's a model of the business. It can be used not only to plan for material replenishment, but also for capacity, finance, storage space, all those different parts. Now, I don't know if that was a complete enough explanation, but I'm open to if there's questions on that.
Oh, that's perfect. Mike, if you can add up on top of that, and I do have a couple of follow-up questions.
Yeah. I'll just add on to Darryl saying, I think it's a model of the business, but one of the big things in the changes, or like he's saying, we're only forecasting at the item store level and calculating everything, even including the supplier. So if you think about the CPFR model, what we're doing is sharing projections of planned shipments that are needed from the supplier to the retailer, if you will, and recalibrating that. So eliminate the need to forecast only in the spot that needs to be. And what we're actually trying to do longer term is kind of change the collaborative framework into let's collaborate. So if you think about an integrated model of business and we're working together, retailer and manufacturer, sharing projections and converting it into whatever language of the business. What we're trying to do is change the collaborative model longer term to be, let's actually collaborate on the inputs to the joint plan, not the outputs. The outputs are the projections. The inputs, what are we doing to drive the business forward? Are we going to promote? Is it new SKUs? Whatever the case might be. If that's in the forecast, it's in the plan shipments and stuff like that. So think of the change. Collaborate on the inputs by exception, and let the projections kind of show you, translate what that means in terms of what you need to do as a supplier or a distribution manager or whatever. So that's sort of flowcasting in a nutshell.
I love it. I think here at bops we're big fans of it, Mike and Darryl, and also for Andrew Martin. I'm gonna kind of rephrase. So what we understand, and I think you explained it perfectly, right? And I like to start with Darryl's phrase, which is let's not forecast what we could calculate. So the forecast, as Mike was mentioning, starts at the store level, and it could be a web store, right, at the point of consumption or point of sale. And from there, you have a living organism of your retail distribution centers all the way down to kind of the consumer brands distribution centers, and in some cases, the manufacturing facilities. You start to kind of add this concept of connected inventory. So now, Darryl and Mike, if you have this living organism where you could see what is happening at the present right now, and you could also see 52 weeks forward, what's the model of inventory needs that you're going to have, where you're going to have potential stockouts or overstock. Tell us a little bit more about the benefit. Why should we take this very simple model, but very modern, to run kind of the supply chains today, not only from a supplier standpoint, but for retailers? Why? What are the benefits that they will take? What are the ROIs that they will take from using this concept?
Well, let me start with Mike. You want me to go ahead? I was going to do the Sam's Kraft thing. Okay.
Sure.
So the idea of dependent demand, and never forecast what you can calculate. When we work in manufacturing, everybody looked at it and said, it makes perfect sense. If we're going to make 100 cars, I need 400 tires. Fine. Here's when I'm making the cars. Here's when I need the tires. Got it. In retail, we said, now we're going to plan for when the stores need shipments. And then that's going to become the demand on the distribution center. And when the distribution center needs shipments, we'll plan those out. And when that's the demand on the supplier. And Walmart, being a very practical group of people, said, yeah, that makes perfect sense. We love it. Prove it. So we said, well, nobody's ever asked us that before. I mean, it's just kind of simple, but they said, well, we're asking you now, so do it. So what we did is and this is the work we did with Sam's Club and Kraft many years ago. We took a projection for 6 weeks. And so, and we looked at what it's projecting that that the orders coming from Sam's Club to Kraft, what they would look like for the various items that they supply. And we numbered them by case. So for any given item called salad dressing, we're projecting that we're going to ship 500 cases tomorrow. So that would be cases 1 through 500. And then we're projecting that we would ship another 750 cases the next day. And that would be 501 through 12 something, right? And we did that out for 6 weeks. So, you know, like for example, on July the 15th, we might have projected that we're going to ship 1,000 cases. And then we watched how the actual orders came in. So when did the first 500 orders cases come in? Did they come in tomorrow, or did some of them come in tomorrow and some of the day after? And we worked that all the way through and measured the difference. So for example, if we projected that cases 1,000 through 1,050 were going to happen on June the 15th, and they actually happened, a case actually happened on June the 14th, then that case got a 1-day error associated with it. And if it happened earlier, it also got a 1-day error. So they don't cancel out, right? And then we looked at a bell-shaped curve that said, how close were we at predicting, you know, looking out on average 4 weeks in the future, how well could we predict when a case would be ordered from Sam's Club to Kraft? And the answer was plus or minus 2.3 days. Now, one was 2.4, one was 2.1 for different months. But, you know, basically, we could project out, you know, 4 weeks in the future and nail it within a couple of days as to when they were going to order, which is remarkable, right? And so they said, yeah, you're right. You did prove it. So that makes good sense. So that's an example of one benefit, is the ability when you integrate the supply chain, now you have a situation where the retailer is telling a supplier, this is what I need. And the supplier can look at what they need and either say, I can do that or I can't. Like there were some situations where the Kraft people came back and said, hey, that promotion that you're planning to run, we cannot ramp up that fast. So what we'd like you to do is to maybe roll it out to this group of stores first and then this group of stores second, and then we can handle it. Or that safety stock change that you want to make, we can't do that all at once. So we'd like you to do it, postpone it for a week, you know, and then we could. So now we have a teamwork thing going where the two parties are working together. Now that manifests itself in things like better service levels at the stores. It manifests itself in lower inventory, because instead of having lots of inventory around all the time, because you never know when you're going to get surprised, you can see it coming at you. It ends up being more productive. The productivity improves because people spend less time scrambling, like, oh my gosh, dude, we got this big surprise, and now we have to make all this stuff in a hurry. They don't have to do that anymore. They can see that coming. And maybe one of the more important aspects of it, but it's not an aspect that's easy to put a dollar value on, is the relationship changes, right? Instead of an adversarial relationship, now you've got these two groups working together. There's certain realities that we all have to deal with, right? And so one of the things that we're dealing with is to say, hey, this is our situation, okay? You needed this, it was told us last week. This week it's changed. We get that. We're fine. But here's how fast we can ramp up. Now let's work with it. And we had a situation where one of the packaging machines for salad dressing, as it turns out, went down for like three weeks because of some burned out motor or something like that. And by cooperating together with one another, the stores never had a stock out. They didn't have any stock outs that whole time, because we took the safety stock down to 0 in the DC, and we checked the safety stocks at the stores, and we manipulated, you know, the order multiples and some things like that. And they all worked together. I mean, both groups worked together, never had a problem. So those are some of the advantages that we've seen. Now I can give you examples from other companies, but that I think is a good illustration. Mike, sorry, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just build on what you said. I think if you think about it, I'm more focused on retail. If you think, well, one of the things we've seen is because the thing is recalibrating every day, in stock, daily in stock in the retail generally goes much higher. Our client at Princess Auto started around 92%, which is about the average across retail, and they're hovering around 98%. That's a big number. So if you're in stock, because if you think about it, if I'm recalibrating every day, things don't sell exactly according to forecast. I recalibrate every day, and even though I thought I needed some, next week, I've recalibrated. Now I've moved it up. Another store I've moved it out. I'm always recalibrating based on the latest and greatest information. So it's recalibrating and almost reorienting the inventory to where it's got to go based on the latest and greatest information, but translating that to everybody in the supply chain. It's also very flexible model. Think of the pandemic. At Princess Auto, the pandemic comes along. Oh, these stores are going to get shut down. Okay, let's adjust the forecast in the future for when that's going to happen. Boom, translated the next day to what that means for everybody in the supply chain. So it allows much more flexibility and agility. So that improves in stock. I'm making decisions on inventory at the 11th hour based on the latest and greatest information. Therefore, inventory flows are better and more aligned to actual consumption, all the way through. So, those are two big benefits in retail. And just, having a single set of numbers, like, capacity planners can see the future. Financially, at retail, we can convert the numbers into dollars, compare it to the business plan to see if we're on track, all that kind of stuff, because you've got the projections at the unit level. So a lot of benefits for sure.
Let me give an example of what Mike is talking about there. There was a client, I won't name him, but there was a client that we work with, and they were spending about $150,000 a month in renting outside frozen storage. And this goes to the issue of single set of numbers. So what was happening was that the buyers were being incented on getting good prices, and they could get good prices by buying lots, large quantities. The distribution folks, unfortunately, were incented on running an efficient distribution operation. So they get penalized if their costs exceeded budget. So because they didn't have a single set of numbers, these two groups were in constant opposition to one another, with the buyers buying tons of stuff and then the distribution folks having to find outside warehouse storage space and handle it twice and spend all this extra money. So they got penalized. They never got any bonuses, whereas the buyers, of course, did. But once you have a single set of numbers, you can now have a simulation of how big those orders are coming in, what the projected on-hand balance is going to be, how much space they take up, therefore how much frozen storage space you need. And if it exceeds your limit, then you can look at that and you can say, over in distribution, you can say, wait a minute, this is going to exceed what we have. Now you can go back and talk to the buyers and say, do you realize that these purchases that you would like to make are going to blow us out of the water? How much are you saving? Okay, X dollars. This is how much it's going to cost to handle the stuff twice and rent outside space. That's Y number of dollars. Now, if X is a big number and Y is a small number, no problem, right? But if X is a sizable number and Y is a very, very large number, then maybe we need to rethink things. And so this is a good example of how within an organization, the lack of teamwork can arise not from people not wanting to work together, but from the lack of a common set of numbers, right? And the inability to recognize that what you're doing is going to make things difficult for somebody else. But if we had a common set of numbers, we could all see the picture, put it up on the screen, talk about it, decide what the best alternative is, and then go with it. It may not be the ideal plan, but it's one that everybody can get behind and make work. That makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. So you got a single set of numbers. I would like to kind of mention what Mike, we will eliminate a reliance. There's an over reliance on forecast accuracy, right? We will recalibrate to take into account reality, look at those single sets of numbers, and then we'll enable better collaboration and then all the ROIs that you mentioned as well. We're talking about operational efficiencies. We're talking about, in some cases, eliminate stockouts, which kind of translates into missed sales or lost sales. We're talking about excess stock as well, which is working capital for the retailer. And in some cases, it goes back to markdowns and discounts for the suppliers. So, Mike, I do want to ask or double click on kind of, you mentioned a lot of the inputs, right? Focusing on the inputs. Can you share, again, some potential either use cases or, again, hypothetical scenarios where we're focusing on the inputs, or where we try to drive a focusing on the inputs, like focusing on the next promotion or focusing on the next event that is going to happen, so that you could have a better set of numbers or single set of numbers?
Yeah, I think you're actually perfect lead, and you're really talking about the retailer and the manufacturer together, looking at what are we going to do? If you think about it, what are we going to do to increase sales to the end consumer collectively, right? Because the flowcasting will translate that. So we may introduce a new line of items. Fantastic. Let's agree when we're going to start that. And that's now in the forecast. The forecast will be 0 and ramp up during that time. Let's agree on when we're going to say promote certain items and stuff like that. So our client in Canada, Princess Auto, does a lot of high-low promotions, but they plan them kind of together with the supplier, so that it's into the forecast. Here's the forecast. Now we're bumping the forecast up based on what we think the increase in sales is going to be. So we're inputting into the kind of joint plan, and then that translates that all the way back to what it means. Maybe that doesn't translate into as much requirement from the supplier because we're overstocked or have more. But it's if you think about the model, it's we have a concept called silence of approval. If I share these projections with my supplier, and we both know that all relevant inputs are in there, we will expect you to work to a concept called silence of approval. That means unless you say otherwise, I expect you to supply. Because if we plan the event far enough out, and most retailers plan 4, 5, 6 months out for things like events, it's because there's significant increases. The supplier would see that in the projections, and unless they say otherwise, we sort of expect them to be able to supply. And that really makes a big difference in terms of being able to deliver and keep customers happy and have stuff on the shelf when you need to. So it's a bit of a shift if you think about it, because it's inputs, calculate the rest, collaborate by exception.
Spot on. I greatly appreciate you sharing it. So let's go back. So you guys came up with Andre Martin, invented the concept of flowcasting. I'll say what, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago?
75.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Wow, amazing. And then what have you learned? We're in 2023. What have you learned? I think what are some of the key lessons learned? And then I'm going to take Patricia Acosta, who is actually joining us from Danone. What are some of the lessons learned that you have, and what is different today? I think if you guys could respond to those two questions, I think the audience is going to be very happy.
Well, I can start with the early history. This would be before Mike, called us up from Canadian Tire. But the early history is that we had MRP, material requirements planning systems, running in manufacturing, and Andre Martin attended a class that was run by Oliver Wight, and the person who's our company's named after, and they said, well, we could take the same concept and apply it to a distribution network. And so that's how we got involved in the implementation at Abbott Canada. And that took off and was remarkably successful. Pretty much everybody has distribution network now, uses some kind of a DRP system. All the different major software suppliers, SAP, Oracle, they all have DRP systems. And so what we learned from that was really no different than what we learned when we applied these systems in manufacturing. You have to have on-hand balance accuracy. You have to have a reasonable forecast. As Mike pointed out, you're constantly recalculating the plan. So if you sold more than you expect, it'll adjust, pull things in. If you sold less, it'll push things out, constantly adjusting things, but those are not major changes usually. You have to have people who are educated and understand what's going on so they can be held accountable for the system. You can't have a situation where somebody goes, I don't know what went on. The computer told me to do it. I did it. Can't hold me accountable for it. And not my fault. So you can't have that kind of a thing. So all those are the sort of the basic things that we have seen in the MRP world that applied to the DRP world. Now, what happened and Mike can probably finish this part of the story, is what happened is when we said, well, okay, so we took it from manufacturing to distribution. What if we went from distribution to retail? And there was a lot of thinking at the time that said, well, that's simple, right? I mean, it's the same deal. It's just a different business. Well, actually, it's a bit more challenging than that because you now have to process, as we were mentioning before, not 20,000 SKUs or 50,000 SKUs, but more like 100 million SKUs or 50 million SKUs. And so, so it's quite a bit of work that had to go on to be able to develop something that was affordable, right? We know of one company that spends, they buy hardware in increments of $10 million. That's just ridiculous. Um, and so it had to be economical to run these huge numbers of SKUs. It also had to be low labor. In manufacturing world, you could, if you spent 2 minutes dealing with exception messages on $40,000 worth of where electronics gets shipped, no problem. But in retail, if you spend 2.5 minutes trying to figure out where a case of beans goes, that's not acceptable. So the labor requirements, the simplicity of the system, it has all be very different. So the lessons, I guess, that we would argue have happened over the last 50 years is the principles are all the same. When you make the jump to retail, you can't take a system designed for 20,000 SKUs and use it for 10 million. It kind of has to get redesigned. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's I've been at this for 30 years, and that's fine. We're there. It's been proven. But Matt Ridley wrote a fantastic book that everybody should read. It's called How Innovation Works, and he's got some very deep insights on innovation. And what he said is most innovation takes a long time. You think it happens overnight, but go back and he's got all kinds of GPS, everything. It takes years and years, many times decades. Most innovation takes a long time, and it's mired with what he calls learnings and adjustments along the way to sort of improve the thinking. So let me give you an example. Early folks read the book. The book's 15, 16 years old. Fantastic, great, super idea, makes perfect sense. Boom, let's take a system designed for manufacturing, distribution, and just apply it to the store level. Problems, significant problems. So what that surfaces is you've got to solve certain problems like slow sellers. At retail, lots of slow sellers. That problem has to get solved because there's lots of items that sell 15, 20 units a year. You've got to create a forecast and replenishment plan. That's a model of the business. That's a valid simulation of reality. So that's an example of kind of what this Matt Ridley guy says is these learnings that need to get adjusted. Thankfully, Darryl has introduced some leading edge thinking that's been proven and works. That's all that. So you see what I mean? If you don't deal with those things, it's how innovation takes a long time. You've got to sort your way through. It's like Dyson, the guy that made the vacuum cleaner, 5,127 prototypes later, he thinks he's perfected it. All these little incremental things. So that's the second profound thing, and that's sort of the evolution of flowcasting. And then he made another profound statement amongst other. He goes, innovation often disappoints in the early years, but exceeds expectations over the long haul because you're working your way through dealing with these nuances and stuff like that. So, I would say that's kind of where we are. But the good news is it's been proven now beyond a shadow of a doubt. Early folks struggled because they applied the wrong kind of thinking, the wrong kinds of technology. The other thing I would say, I've learned because I'm probably more focused in retail is, and I think this is sort of a question. It's a mindset change, particularly in retail. Retailers have been very focused on ordering, get ordering. This is a sort of a planning mindset. Ordering is almost, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but you know what I mean? It's the last step. I'm planning. Now it's time to convert that plan to an order. That's sort of not how retail has worked for a long time. So when you're changing a prevailing paradigm, it takes a while and stuff like that. And I think somebody's got a question in the chat. It's a change management focused change. You know what I mean? Changing the thinking, educating people, making sure they understand, becoming decent at planning demand, making sure that suppliers are educated and understand the concept of getting supplier schedules. So, those are some of the things, but it just some innovation just takes time. I
Absolutely.
Really,
and I like to piggyback on the change of mindset, especially for consumer goods suppliers that are listening to us. Usually you try to do kind of a forecast in the different, when you talk about your modern supply chain or your retail supply chain network, if the mindset is changed it means that you don't need to do a forecast at your distribution center, right? You should be relying on the Walmart supply plan or forecasting or your retailer supply plan that they're giving you, so that you could then do the calculations to quickly readjust what is happening. So I think that's one of the things of the mindset of using demand, or what we call the consumer demand, to be able to kind of synchronize the consumer flow all the way down into kind of your different facilities, your points of distribution, all the way down to your manufacturing. And eventually, the ideal will be to kind of feed these signals to your suppliers as well. I think you have that responsibility as a big manufacturer to be able to share this data with your own suppliers, so that they could then fulfill your raw materials at the right time, at the right moment, at the right quantity. So it's really a flow and a change of mindset that starts with consumer demand. And then consumer demand starts at the store, but it could also be at a web store. And I think if you guys could provide Mike and Darryl some recommendations of this change of mindset of, Darryl, you mentioned collaboration. I think a team mentality, which starts at the point of sale with the retailers, it's something that we need to start fostering. And I think it starts with the retailer, as you alluded, Mike. But any other points you want to add of recommendations to kind of consumer suppliers?
Yeah, I think if you think about how the relationship changes, the people side of it is our experience is that's the most important part of this whole thing. Once you have the basic tools to do the job, and one of the things you'll find is that in the same way that I described the company that had the frozen outside storage space, and you had the buyers over here doing what was good for them, and you had the distribution people over here suffering as a result of it. That happens between companies, right? So from a retailer's point of view, you can say, hey, it's your job to get the product to me when I want it, in whatever quantity I want, anytime I want it. Okay. But by the way, I don't have to pay a lot of money for it. Okay. And then that's a very unspecific way to deal with somebody. If on the other hand, we say, okay, if this is what you think you need, and this is what we'll see for fluctuations, and this is what we need for safety stock, these are the quantities we want to ship, and this is what it looks like. Now, is everybody okay with that? Suddenly somebody goes, well, no, that's not we want to see less inventory. Okay, fine. We can take the safety stock down, but that's going to give us more out of stocks. Is that okay? No, I don't want that. Okay. All right. We can ship more frequently in smaller quantities. No, I don't want that either, because that's good increased handling. Okay. And well, what if I ship by train instead of by truck? That's less expensive, but now it's bigger quantities. Well, that might work. Let's just look at that. Okay. But the point is that where before you could have one group of people saying, give me what I want, don't make excuses. And now you've got an arrangement where they're together, they're solving problems. They're saying, what are the limitations? What are the kinds of things we're trying to achieve? What are the best ways to get there? How can we work together to make this happen? It's a very, very different dynamic. Now, there's still, in retail, there's still, the men of few words, large baseball bat, beat the daylights out of the suppliers. They're still out there, right? But more and more people are realizing that's not an effective way to bring down cost. It's certainly a stressful way to run a company. And for all the financial reasons, you can justify doing it differently. And it's also better for people in terms of just their day-to-day quality of life.
Spot on, Darryl. Agree. Mike, any other words before we go into questions from the audience?
No, I think I just build a little bit on Darryl's thing. I think if I was a manufacturer and my key retail customers, I'd want to say, well, how are we going to make this model work? Because I'm not. I want to be careful, but I haven't seen too many models that allow in stock at retail to be 98, 99%, and also keep the inventory flowing. This is kind of a model. Yeah, I mean, so if you think about it, collectively, there's an enormous benefit. There's an enormous benefit to the retailer, because every 1 to 2% increase in stock is about a 1% increase in sales. That sounds like nothing, but that's for a decent sized retailer, that's tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. So, there's big proven benefits to this model. How do we make it work together? Because If I was a manufacturer, I'd want to get my top retail customers providing me schedules or working together, because it helps the end consumer, which is good for everybody, right? So that's sort of what I would be doing.
That's spot on. So there's joint benefits. I think I'm seeing some questions from the audience. I'm gonna go read them very quickly and ask some of those. I think the last one we have from the audience, there's an anonymous attendee. So how have advancements in data processing and technology, we haven't talked about technology, make this easier to implement today compared to, again, 20, 30 years ago?
Well, I can answer that one, having written, 2 pieces of software that do this, right? And it's been proven to work. The first thing is you have to take the design that we have. If we go back to the DRP systems for manufacturers' distribution centers, you're planning for 20, 30,000 SKUs. Database, at the time was probably running 20, 30 milliseconds to access something on a disk. It wasn't a big deal. You could buy enough hardware. It wouldn't be a big deal. Now you take 100 million SKUs and you do the same amount of database accessing, you're dead in the water. Okay. It isn't going to work. You're going to need, tens of millions of dollars of computer hardware. And, that's aside from the whole labor thing that I talked about before. So one of the things that's happened is that it's not so much that the advances in computers have made this possible. It's more that the design has made this possible, to say, okay, we only have so much we can do with the database. How do we do more things in memory, for example, like a forecast? Let's say a forecast for 30 days. Rather than store 31-day forecasts, why don't we store a monthly forecast and a profile and then break it down in memory to the individual days, right? Now that's going to take a lot less processing time. Why don't we use net change, right? So if we have a lot of slow moving items and the slow moving items are not going to move but once every couple of weeks, there's no need to recalculate them every day, right? So if there's a change, we'll calculate it. But if there's not a change, we don't need to touch it for a while. And these are concepts that have been around since, I don't know, 1980, something like that. So the real advances have not been technological. Now, the newer versions of things are not monolithic systems. They're more microservices, right? For example, we're working right now on the Google Cloud version, which uses app engines, which are automatically scalable to, enormous number. The Google Spanner database, which is spread all over the world. It's automatically scalable. Pub sub messages, so it's event driven. You could feed it point of sale data throughout the day and it would continuously recalculate. So I don't mean to imply that there aren't some technical advances that have happened, but the real challenge was solved by just designing the system properly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I would add one thing. I mean, what Darryl did in the Oliver Wight solution is he said, okay, lots of guys had a system that was designed for manufacturing distribution. Instead of trying to scale that up, what he did was, and I think if you think it's the right point, if I can create a model of the business at store level for the various planning scenarios, whether that's slow sellers, seasonal, whatever, I know the cascaded demand will be sensible as well. And that makes a huge difference because you strip away, you're not trying to take something that's got all kinds of stuff in it and push it up to the store. I'm starting at the store, and if I can create a valid simulation of reality for all sort of planning scenarios, seasonal, whatever the case may be, then it can cascade its way down. And I think that makes it simpler. And then once it's simpler, it's much easier to scale.
Did we answer that question sufficiently? Is the person who asked that question okay with the answer?
Hopefully.
I think
Okay.
they are. It was anonymous, so yes. And I think we briefly touch upon one of the questions, which is, why has a completely integrated supply chain been so elusive in the past, and why is now possible? And I think we briefly touch upon, but I don't know if you want to summarize the answer, Mike or Darryl.
Well, first of all, it's not elusive. Okay. because we've had 100% success rate on every implementation we've done. Now, on the other hand, if you take a DC level DRP system and try to run it for 20 million SKUs, you're going to have a very, very difficult time. I'm not saying it wouldn't be better than what you had before, because it might be, okay, but it's going to be a real challenge. So it's not so much that we've had a consistent success rate is all it is the best way to say it, but only if we did things the right way.
Yeah.
Spot on. I think we're right on time, folks. So any other closing remarks, Mike and Darryl, you wanna portray around flowcasting before we close?
I'm good, Mike.
Yeah, no, I think it's, thanks for having us. The model works, it's been proven. We've got clients that are very successful using this, and Matt really was right. It does take a while, but we'll get there.
Absolutely. I want to thank you both for the contributions in the retail supply chain and the concept of flowcasting, especially in kind of the collaboration between retailers and suppliers of any industry, really. We could apply it at any industry. So we're much thankful. We're going to be, as part of the episode, we're going to be sharing some of your books and documentation, which I think a lot of the supply chain experts, CPFRs, demand planners should be reading. I think you guys have a very simple and modern concept, and we much appreciate you sharing it with the audience. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
Take care.